Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice a week we help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of property investment and wealth creation. Today we're going to tackle one of the most critical decisions every property investor faces: where to buy. It's often said the three most important factors in property investment are location, location, and location. But what does that really mean? Not every suburb or street will deliver the kind of growth and returns you're hoping for. To truly succeed, you need to be looking at investment-grade locations, those rare spots that consistently outperform the broader market. So today I'm joined by Brett Warren, Director of Property at Metropole, an expert in identifying high-potential locations. Brett spent years analysing data, spotting trends, and helping investors make smarter decisions. Today, he's going to share his insights into what makes a location investment grade, why some areas will rise while others will stagnate, and how you can position yourself for maximum growth. So if you're tired of mediocre returns and you want your investments to really stand out, this episode's for you. We're going to dive deep into the strategies that help you choose the right locations and set up your property portfolio for success. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Location, location, location. I'm sure you've heard about the importance of location. In fact, you've probably heard me say that location of your property will do probably about 80% of the heavy lifting of its capital growth. But what makes a great location for investments? And today I want to have a chat with Brett Warren, National Director of Property at Metropole, about this, and also maybe even dig a bit deeper what makes a great location for property development. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Michael. Good to be with you. Looking forward to unpacking some of this.
Well, Brett, I know that you manage the team of researchers, property strategists, wealth advisors and buyers agents at Metropole, and I know our team take many factors into account when looking for the right location. I mean, we've got to have the right property in the location, but it all starts with location. And I know that if one researches to find an investment-grade location, you're well on the way to property investment success. But boy, there are many factors involved in looking at this. And I know you're actually currently preparing for the upcoming Ultimate Property Development Workshop in Melbourne on October the 5th, where you're honing this down even further into what locations are ripe for property development. So let's dig into it. What are the sort of factors that one should look for, an investor should look for when finding an investment grade location?
Yeah, look, Michael, it's a good one, because I often hear you say property investing should be simple but not easy, and that's the case here. I get many people that kind of talk to me about, oh yeah, your strategy is to buy in capital cities, and look, effectively it is, but when you break it down, it's not as easy as that. It's quite complicated. So as part of what we do, there's many different factors we look at.
Actually, if I could interrupt for a sec, Brett, people say we're biased, and we are. But we are biased to long-term rather than short-term successes. So yes, an outperforming area in a regional location will outperform an underperforming area, not investment-grade location in the capital city. But I interrupted you a second ago, there isn't a Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane property market, so we're biased to investment-grade locations in those capital cities. I don't mind being biased.
No, that's right, and especially if it continues to work and continues to produce above average rates of return. So I guess we want to get into more detail about, rather than just having a generalisation of we're going to buy in, and certain, like, how do we find those pockets? How do we get into the right areas at the right locations and get in the top 5% of the market? So the first thing is obviously looking at demographics, and I've got a great podcast just starting with Simon Kirstenmacher about this, and we often hear him talk about demographics being destiny. But we're looking for areas in investment grade locations, firstly, where I guess residents' incomes in those areas are growing faster, and also people who are moving to those areas are growing faster as well. And the retirees are lower socioeconomic, are moving out. Young families, double income professionals are moving in, pushing up prices. They've got the ability to, I guess, knock over properties, knock over houses in downturns. And look, we're probably closer to another downturn than we are to a boom. So it's important we invest in these areas because they've got higher savings rates and buffers, and they can kind of round these difficult times out as well. They can spend more on property. So your money's going to be safer in those areas, and generally people are going to pay more for getting into those locations. So I think that's critically important because most of the country's kind of gone up in value, and there's going to be a period there where incomes are going to need to recharge. And in these areas, they seem to recharge faster.
I think that's a really good point, Brett. It's not just owner-occupiers, and I think you made a really great point because a lot of people look at what the statistics show of what incomes are and they should grow faster than the state average. But your point was it's actually not just the people living there. It's people moving in, which is another point I know you're going to make in a moment. But it's also the tenants, because as investors, we want tenants who choose to live in those areas, not because they're poor, not because they can't afford to buy, but interestingly, because they want the lifestyle or the amenity. Now, interestingly, only last week, one of my investment properties in a great suburb of Melbourne was rented out to the property manager at Metropole, sent me a tenant application, and it was the director of one of the very large estate agencies, in fact, the head of their property management department. This is actually the second time you know the story about the other one, who was the director of another estate agency. And this guy's got a number of investment properties, but chose to rent at a top rent, a fantastic townhouse, because of the location that would suit his two young children. He's not renting there because he's poor. He's renting there for lifestyle purposes. And interestingly, he would only rent on a 2-year lease. He wouldn't take. He was a good negotiator because he's the boss of a large estate agency. But we came to an agreement. So it's not just the demographics of the owner-occupiers that are going to push up values in your area, but also the demographics of the potential tenants.
They've got a demand. They've got to increase that demand. And I guess the biggest demand, I feel, kind of comes from those bigger employment hubs. So I often get people saying, oh, look, so-and-so is getting a university or a hospital. And I'll say, well, how many jobs is that going to create? A couple of hundred. If we're looking at the CBDs, the airports, the hospitals aren't hospitals anymore. They're big research facilities, mental health, aged care, things like that as well. So we need these huge employment hubs, not just things that employ a couple of hundred. And we just don't fight the big trends, do we? So the bulk of jobs on offer consistently are going to be in Sydney and Melbourne, and Brisbane's probably catching up a little bit. And that's why we're biased, because we're not fighting the big trends.
Well, interestingly, the majority of the higher paying jobs, the knowledge jobs, and they're the ones that can fit in with the first point you made about demographics. And interestingly, they don't all work in the CBD anymore, do they? There are, in all our capital cities, employment hubs, as you said, outside the CBDs.
Yeah, we're getting a few satellite cities, aren't we, around the area? And I guess that'll lead into things like our 20-minute neighbourhood, where you get these miniature CBDs where you can go and work at these kinds of facilities and major shopping centres and mini CBD areas with hospitals and business precincts and things like that as well. But again, pushing that 20-minute neighbourhood, everything's in walking distance. There's coffee shops, there's restaurants, there's work, there's public transport. There's that third place where people can go and relax, maybe a park or a sports precinct or something like that. So those kinds of things get more important. The next generation, Michael, don't want to keep moving further and further out, do they? They want to stay put. They want to stay where the good things are, and particularly the next generation with doctors and dentists and aged care. They're not moving out to the fringes anymore. They're happy to kind of downsize into smaller accommodation if there's more around them.
They're prepared to trade backyards for balconies and courtyards, and we're seeing townhouses as an increasing preferred style of accommodation for a lot of these young families. So rather than kicking the footy in the backyard like you did, I didn't kick a footy much, but I know you're into that. But nowadays they're happy to go to the park. So you're 100% right. They want the amenities in the location. Doesn't have to be in their backyard, does it?
No, that's right. Probably the biggest thing, like every investment, Michael, there has to be a level of supply and demand. We've got to balance that evenly. So, we favour buying in locations where there's no more supply or very limited, supply. If you're looking on the outskirts and regions and major areas, you can probably build another 1,000 houses over the next 2 or 3 years. Whereas in inner city, into middle ring, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, there's no more land available. But as we spoke about before, because of those job opportunities and schools and all those kinds of really important things, there's huge demand. So, that's a tidal wave of demand with no supply. And I guess that's the kind of imbalance we look for in those kinds of markets. Sure, other markets will fluctuate from time to time. As we saw during COVID, there was much more higher demand than probably the markets could keep up with in regional areas. But that's kind of fiddled out now, and they're kind of one-off hits, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Now, supply and demand in some ways is a more short term factor, and there's always suddenly a new apartment building or other things that are coming up that may affect it in the short term. But I think your point really is that more of us want to live in the middle suburbs and inner suburbs, and there isn't going to be the ability to create large developments, large amount of new stock at bulk, and that which they will create is going to be much more expensive because the land on which it sits is going to be expensive, and the construction technique of medium density developments is going to cost a lot more as well. So we're working through the factors that you and the team at Metropole look at to find an investment grade location. We've spoken about demographics, employment opportunities, which are going to be people coming in, supply and demand, neighbourhood character, walkability, which I think is part of neighbourhood character. You want to, if possible, a 20-minute neighbourhood if you can. And also, I guess, infrastructure and amenities. We've already spoke about that. In the outer suburbs, they tend to lag a while. They don't actually build all those amenities before people move. People have to be there for a while before they come.
They do, and look, even some cases that even if they're in a stage two, they finally get a train line, and everyone believes that that's going to push up property prices. But then there's another 10 land releases left, and all that demand, and it kind of fizzles, and you've got that leftover supply, which means the market lags. So the other thing you kind of get in those inner to middle ring suburbs, you get that gentrification. For me, this is a big one. Particularly if you're interested in property development, you never want to be a pioneer. You never want to be the first person to actually do a development in a location that's unproven and untested. So we're looking for areas where people are knocking over houses and, replacing them, and owner-occupiers are getting carried away and probably spending a bit much. And particularly if you're doing a property development, you want to make sure there's a level of precedent there where there's probably, a half a dozen that have been approved that are similar to what you're doing. So that greatly reduces the risk, doesn't it, Michael, for property development?
Well, it does. So property development is the way I know a lot of our clients at Metropole are wanting to move forward and play the game the big boys play. We started way back in 2000 as development project managers, and we're still involved in a lot of projects in Melbourne and Brisbane. But many people want to learn the basics and, in fact, the details of property development. And I know you and Greg Hankinson and Lachlan Murrams and Leanne Jobson are going to be holding the Ultimate Property Development Workshop in Melbourne on the 5th of October. I'll leave a link in the show notes where we're at the moment spending a lot of time putting together a very detailed A to Z manual of property development, all the various stages, including a whole lot of Metropole's checklists. I mean, Greg's been involved in over 1,000 developments as a builder, as a developer, and managing our clients' property development projects. So again, the things we're talking about at the moment are not just related to property development. Finding an investment grade location is critical, but finding one in a suburb that's gentrifying, as you said, Brett, that means that you don't have to do the heavy lifting. The suburb's doing the heavy lifting for you, which works beautifully. You're actually doing part of the gentrification as you do the development.
Yeah, and look, I mean, a lot of people may potentially buy a property and not develop it for a couple of years as well. And as properties go up around it, that just increases the end values and makes their development more attractive when it comes time to do that also. So it's a great way for property to increase in value without doing much, isn't it?
Well, it is. And gentrification doesn't occur over a day or two or a couple of years. It actually is up in a 20, 30-year cycle as people change. So how do you know an area gentrifies? Well, basically, you just drive through and you actually see the different sort of cars that are there. You can actually see the cafes and the wine bars and the restaurants and the shops, and the older houses are being pulled down. And we like areas that are gentrifying in a number of ways, not just with multi-unit developments, not just with townhouses, but we also like it where owner-occupiers are building nice homes as well, so that you've got a blend of people there helping the area grow.
Yeah, and look, the other good thing about those kind of more affluent owner-occupiers, they tend to overcapitalise, don't they? So they'll think nothing of spending an extra $100,000 or $200,000 on a renovation because they know they're going to be there for 10 years, and that sets a precedent for the next one and the next one. So definitely those opportunities are in there, that's for sure.
Well, interestingly, as I said, one way of finding it is you see the trendy cafes, the microbreweries, maybe a new hairdresser or bakery. But I learned something else many years ago. You can tell a trending gentrifying area by the kind of dogs people have. Now, I'm not sure that's the right answer, but in gentrifying areas, you're probably going to see more Dachshunds and Cavoodles. And if in the outer suburbs, you're going to see more Bull Terriers and Staffies.
It probably used to be the car. It used to be the Falcons and the Holdens, Michael. Now it's the dogs, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, yes.
Look, I guess the last one, Michael, is becoming more and more important, particularly for those people who want to spend a bit more money and want to get into these more affluent locations. Is to have a low crime rate for family reasons and school and security and things like that. So that's another thing we often kind of keep an eye on as well.
Unfortunately, when you open the media, the news, the TV news at night, the crime rate is creeping up. And so, therefore, I think security and safety is amongst the top of the list for people. So, we looked a little bit at the sort of things to look for. Maybe we should just have a quick talk about the different types of locations. It's a bit like Monopoly. Everyone wants the Park Lanes and Mayfairs. Nobody ever wins Monopoly buying Old Kent Road. So how would you characterise the different locations in a big capital city like any of our capital cities?
The first one of that is the discretionary location. So that's probably the more affluent, the Mayfairs, the Park Lanes, where people want that exclusivity. They want to buy in the best areas they can, and the best properties are probably a little bit more affluent than everyone else. So it's probably a thinner part of the market. It's not a bad market to get involved in, but there's probably, I guess I like the way you say it, Michael. Some people wake up one day and realise a $15 million mansion will do just as well as a $20 million mansion, and there can be fluctuations at that top end and things like that as well. So,
interestingly, Brett, I just read yesterday that the top price for a house in my suburb, Brighton, was sold last week for $24.5 million. But those areas tend to fluctuate in price more. When the market's doing well, they go up a lot. They're more variable. So I know that in general, that's not the areas where we suggest investing, is it, Brett?
No, it's not. I guess the second level, which is the aspirational locations, are the areas we want to get into. So they're probably the green ones and the red ones on or the yellow ones on Monopoly. I can't quite remember the names, but the Strand and Trafalgar and those ones. So I mean, they're probably more affordable. They're more aspirational. They're probably in the middle ring. They're just below that. But it's a fatter part of the market. There's more depth in the market. There's more aspirational people who really want to get into those areas. They wake up. They work hard. They've generally got the great school catchments. They can, provide great education for the family. They can leave the car at home on the weekend and walk to the coffee shops and restaurants and the parks and reserves and things like that as well. So that's a really important part of where we like to get into the market.
Now, this is for buy and hold investments as well as development, but we know that millennials are moving into the family formation stage of their life. They're moving out of the apartments, but they want more space. They're wanting an extra bedroom or two. They're wanting a media room. So many of them are now moving they'd love to have a house, but to get a house in their budget, they'd have to go quite a number of kilometres out, and they're not going to have the neighbourhood character. So I know many affluent millennials, including all my 4 kids, living in townhouses because it gives them a blend of both the great lifestyle locations and the accommodation they want. And that's a big trend, the demographic trend that's occurring, that millennials are going to be looking for that. But we're, again, looking for the wealthier demographic moving into those suburbs to push up property values, even though we're not going to sell our investment property. But if others around us are pushing up values, that helps the value of the property that we've purchased as an investment.
Yeah, look, the next ones are probably areas we don't really target too much, Michael. But having said that, they've probably been swept up in that once-in-a-generation boom and actually done all right in the last 3 or 4 years. But as I said before, particularly if you're a developer and you're looking to develop, I guess there's some danger signs here now, because the next one are the kind of the affordable locations where people, unfortunately are living paycheck to paycheck. Interest rates are quite high, cost of living's rising, so they're really starting to struggle, and they can't afford to pay more than they probably should and they want to. And I guess they're kind of locked into these locations where, look, they're comfortable, it's good and life's good as well. But again, in these kinds of areas, you're not going to get the growth, particularly in the next 5 years, than you will in the other areas. And there's probably a lot more risk in these kinds of locations too.
I agree. So why won't there be the growth? Because the people moving there, and it's not a judge of people, are basically spending all their money on the living expenses and their mortgage. And so therefore they're having trouble improving the areas. They're not gentrifying. And similarly, tenants as well. But there is a whole swag of these new advisors out there advising people to buy at the cheaper end of the market. And at the moment, the market is favouring people who are buying there because in the short term, properties in the more affluent areas and middle ring suburbs are not performing as well as the cheaper areas, even though they're the areas that led this boom a year or so ago. Having said that, we're not in it for the short term, are we, Brett?
No, that's right. The last one of the last choice locations, and unfortunately, these are people that I guess they live where they have to, where they can afford to. It probably dictates where they live and where they choose to live. And we certainly would avoid those locations because of the risk factors and the elements involved there, particularly, those kind of markets can kind of turn on a dime. So if you're looking to develop a year or two out, it's not a great area to have that kind of, I guess, flatlining and predictability.
Well, I guess a bit like Monopoly, owning the right investment properties in the right location will do, as I said before, up to 80% of the heavy lifting of your property's returns. Now, again, you can't just buy anywhere in those suburbs. You've got to buy in the right locations within those suburbs. I guess that's a whole different conversation. But in location isn't the only thing to consider. And we know that A-grade properties and investment grade properties are currently in short supply, even though we've got lots of clients currently who've engaged the services of Metropole to help them buy properties. The team are having real difficulty finding good properties, not difficulty finding properties, but ones we'd be happy to recommend.
Definitely. I can certainly say that. I can see what's happened there. And look, we're very, very lucky, Michael. We do have a bit of an unfair advantage because we actually get 60 to 70% of our properties off market at the moment. If we weren't finding those off market opportunities and networking and discussing with agents and things like that as well and getting in pre-market before everybody else, I think we'd really be struggling to service our clients because everyone's trying to do the same and everyone's got the same tricks at the moment. But we're very lucky we've got that I guess we call it an unfair advantage, don't we?
I guess that's true. So owning the right properties is important, and A-grade properties aren't necessarily located in those most expensive suburbs that we talked about just a moment ago, and they don't all come with multi-million-dollar price tags by any means. We found some really good ones even in the $500,000 and $600,000 bracket for our clients at Metropole. But they're the sort of properties where there'll always be a depth of buyers regardless of market condition. Now, I know it's very rare to find the ideal property. Most times we're going to make little compromises. When you stumble across an A-grade property, they really need any sort of compromises. They tend to tick all the boxes. On the other hand, with the B-grade property, buyers have to make some sort of compromises. And usually when you're looking to buy a property, I think there's three things you play with: your budget, and that's usually out of your control. It's controlled by the bank; location, and then the type of property. And in my mind, if you've got to choose between those, location's really important. Then the right property in that location. But I would be avoiding the C and D grade properties, which are currently struggling on the market anyway. The market seems to have become pretty informed, Brett.
I agree. I think it has. People are that kind of bubble has kind of burst, I guess, the last 4 or 5 years, and then those kind of markets are returning to a normal market now.
Sure. Okay. So I know you manage a significant team of people at Metropole helping our clients, and part of the team are doing research. So, Brett, tell us about the different types of research you and the team do.
Yeah, sure. I think this is really important to understand because there's two types of research we do. The first one we call is fundamental analysis, and that's long-term research and long-term data. So they're things that take, anywhere from 5, 10, 15 years to change. And that gives you an element of certainty when you're buying into that market because you're looking at things like the supply and demand over a period of time, what's coming on the market, the availability of land and the number of sales. We spoke before about weekly incomes and family incomes as well. That's incredibly important. Looking back, I know we talk a little bit about history and performance. It is important to understand, and we don't look back over the last 5 years because every property is going to look great. We look back over 20 years and get a real understanding of the good times. But also we'd like to know what happens in the bad times when there is a recession, there is a downturn. Good markets probably lose 5 or 10%, but they recover quite quickly. And I guess secondary markets probably lose 20 and probably take 4 or 5 years to recover. So those long-term fundamentals are really important because we're trying to invest for our clients for the next 20 years, not just the next 20 weeks. So understanding those fundamentals are important. And then we slide the technical analysis into it. And this is really, really important because now we've got to find, I guess, the time we've got to find the right area, the right location. So we're looking at things like days on market, vendor discounting prices, what asking prices are. We talk a little bit about median house prices, but I think we do most of our research is on asking prices, and we can actually see that whether it's going up or down and the situation there. Things like vacancy rates, and each week we can also monitor auction clearance rates and things like that. So those kind of things can change from week to week, month to month, but that's important for timing. The other's important, and I'd take the fundamental analysis every day of the technical analysis, because if you do get some of the technical analysis wrong, that location will do the rest of the heavy lifting for you. So you've got to have that element between the two, Michael.
Well, we've spoken before about property investment being part art and part science. And at the moment, there's lots of people saying, I've got all this data. I know about the data. I know what's happened before. But I know that the team at Metropole actually have all that information too. For every suburb going back to the 1980s, I think there's 15,000 suburbs, we can tell you what's happened. But that's looking in the rear vision mirror. So some of the things you spoke about before, and in particular demographics, is looking ahead. That gives us a crystal ball as to what's ahead. Now, there's no certainty about it, but it's much better to understand what's happening with regard to wages, gentrification, job creation, employment growth, which is then going to create population growth, which is going to create demand. And I know at the Ultimate Property Development Workshop, you're going to actually show the tools and the websites that we use to get the research. So this is really useful whether you're going to actually just have a buy and hold investment or do tiny manufacturing capital growth by renovations or refurbishments, or in particularly so the sort of research one's going to need to do if you want to get involved in property development. So sorry to give a plug again, but I think this is so exciting because we've run this type of workshop since 2004. It's got a proven track record of having people who've come and then taken their investments to the next level. If you want to get an idea of what you could achieve, what you could learn from it, I'll leave you a link in the show notes. Go to realestateworkshop.com.au and you'll see some of the projects that clients have done, that people have done, some of the comments of people who've been there. And this is not a selling workshop, it's a training. So it's depth, different, very different to all those online webinars that then wanted to sell you a long course, Brett.
Well, there's nothing to sell at the end of it, is there? So that's the important thing. But I guess, as you said before, it's really important that the average investor understands this research, these fundamentals, where to look for these kinds of things. But doing a development, there's an added layer of complexity, isn't there, Michael? Because you can't just develop in 2 weeks' time. Sometimes it can take a year or two to get the approvals and get everything through and construct. So you could be in a very different situation in 18 to 24 months' time. So some of this data and some of this information that we're going to show you, and by the way, most of it's not behind a paywall, is it? It's not like an RP data where you have to subscribe. Most of it's information you can get access to, and it's freely available. And that's exactly what we want to show you. So we want you to go away having the systems, the procedures, the research, knowing where to find it, and knowing how to carry out a development.
Well, the A to Z Property Development Manual takes you step by step through all that. Having said that, you do need the perspective. So just looking at this and not understanding how to interpret it makes a difference as well. And you and Greg have been doing this for a long, long time. In fact, we all have. But I'm now really excited that you, Greg, and Leanne Jobson, Lachlan Myrons are going to be running the Ultimate Development Workshop in Melbourne on the 5th of October. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Brett, we've discussed a whole lot of things. There's lots more to talk about. Some of that will be covered at the workshop, but I look forward to catching up with you again real soon for the next podcast, where we're going to help people demystify all that's going on and get some clarity in these confusing times.
Yep, there's plenty happening, isn't there? But it's all starting to unfold, so I look forward to catching up next time.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Michael.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I'd like to talk to you about how to be happier with your money. Now, I recently heard a story about a wealthy couple who were at a party hosted by a multi-millionaire, and the wife said to her husband, "Do you realise that our host makes more money in one day than you do in a year?" Interestingly, her spouse's response was, "Yes, but I've got something he'll never have. Enough." Now, that's a great lesson to learn, isn't it? So how much money is really enough? Now, I grew up in a poor household where money was scarce, and while I can't actually remember when it was, I know I was very young when I decided I wanted to become wealthy. I wanted to become wealthy through property investment after seeing the lifestyle some of my friends' parents enjoyed because they owned investment properties. What I didn't realise at the time was that it was likely to take me 30 years to develop a big enough asset base to give me the sizable passive income that I was after. I didn't realise at the time that along the way I'd need a real job, I'd have to practice delayed gratification and money discipline, and I'd have to work long hours and hard and save and invest and reinvest my money. Back then, I didn't realise that you need to do the hard work early in your life so you can have an easier life later on. What I do remember was that I wanted to be a millionaire by the age of 30. Now, back then, and remember that was more than 50 years ago, $1 million was worth a lot more than it was today. So, how much money is enough? $1 million might have been sufficient 50 years ago, but how much is enough today? And how do you even work it out? Well, in his book, 30 Lessons for Living, Tried and True Advice from the Wisest Americans, gerontologist Carl Pillemer interviewed well over 1,000 elderly people mainly aged between about 80 and 100, and he was looking for sources of unique guidance from those who'd already lived a rich and fulfilling life. One of the things I found interesting was that not one person out of the 1,000 interviewed said that to be happy you should try to work hard or you should have as much money as you can to buy things you want. Not one person said it was important to be at least as wealthy as the people around you, and if you have more than they do, then you're a success. Not one person, not a single person said you should choose your work based on your desire for future earnings. Now, to be clear, the elderly didn't say that money isn't important, because it is. They didn't rule out that more money might have made them happier, because it most likely would have. Remember, any problem that money can solve isn't really a problem, is it? But it seems like the elderly understood the important concept of enough. Now, studies show that money does increase your happiness. Research that we quote in our book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits, that Tom Corley and I wrote and that has become an international bestseller and that's been translated into 5 languages, research we quote in our book shows that there's not even a known satiation point. A higher income makes virtually everyone happier, although each dollar delivers less happiness than the one before. Interestingly, psychologist Daniel Kahneman wrote in his book, This Will Make You Smarter, he wrote the following. On average, individuals with higher income are in better moods than people with lower income, but the difference is about a third as large as most people expect. He also said, when you think of rich people and poor people, your thoughts are inevitably focused on circumstances in which income is important. But happiness depends on other factors more than it does on income. In other words, when I was young and saw all those rich landlords and wanted to be one myself, I imagined a big income would make me happier. Yeah, I was pretty miserable growing up. But I thought it would make me happier because I thought about the luxurious imported cars that the rich people drove, the nice houses they lived in, rather than thinking about the years of hard work that they had to put in and the lack of family life that they often sacrificed to get where they are now. Just look what happened to all those actors and the sporting heroes who earn staggering incomes yet ruin their family lives. So what does make you happier? Not surprisingly, psychologists have found, they've looked into it, they've actually looked to see what makes people happy, and researchers broadly agree that 4 major points have a big impact on making people happy. Number 1, having control over what you're doing. Number 2, progress in what you're pursuing. The 3rd point is connection with other people, and the 4th is having a purpose and meaning. That's it. You'll notice more money isn't on the list. But you can easily see how more money ties into these points. Money can grant you the freedom from being locked into a job that you don't enjoy. Money can provide the tools necessary to achieve progress in pursuing your goals. Money can afford you time off and a chance to spend time with the people that matter to you. Money can give you the ability to provide charity and community contributions, bringing meaning and purpose to your life. Yes, money is important in those areas where it's important, and not at all important in those areas where it's not important. So I believe Striving to be rich, striving for financial independence is worthwhile, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. Yet it's a race worth running because it's going to allow you to live your life by design. You're going to have more control over your life. But think about it. How much money is enough? How will you know when you have enough? Will you ever know when enough is enough? Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. Hey, but before you move on to the next podcast you're hoping to listen to, please let me remind you that I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher that we call Demographics Decoded, where we unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. This is a must-listen to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, business or entrepreneurship. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, please stop for a second, subscribe on your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. Now, if you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody else who'd benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcast, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Or just talk to them, tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour. You're definitely going to be doing me a favour in helping in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, you can catch up with me in between these shows on social media, or you can join my private Facebook group. Just go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I've got a special bonus for you to say thank you for subscribing. Just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There's a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. That's my way of saying thank you to you for taking the time to listen. Oh, by the way, if you haven't listened to the many podcast episodes we've already got, we're well into our 600s of episodes now. You can always listen to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?